Okay, you guys are good to go. Let's talk about teams.
Thanks, Paige.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Susan. Just doing some stretches over here.
How are you?
Oh, we're live. Okay. I'm good. I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back with you this week.
Yeah. It's funny. It seems like we do more than one a week.
Well, there is the prep work and all that kind of stuff, you know. So sometimes we go over that. We practice. But after we've been talking about the things we carry, when I think it was interesting, we kind of decided that we're going to follow up with this little series, maybe for the next couple of weeks, about teams. And when I was looking over, thinking about some things we could talk about, I was really curious about, because I know how we function now, which I think that we'll get to, kind of like our structure about volunteers. But I was kind of wondering how you came about the structure that we have now. So maybe could you take us back a little bit and talk about when you thought it was good to go with more than one person, which is what we do now?
Well, when I started out, it was just me. It was an idea I had in my head. Paige actually helped me kind of flesh it out a little bit, gave it its name, one library at a time. And the first library I did was in David, Panama, in a slum where literally it was like you see on TV, where there was a faucet, a communal faucet, and the little kids would go get the water and take them home. And this was actually at a feeding center site, and the gentleman there had built room for a library. So that's a whole wonderful story that one day we need to tell, called The Marvelous Miracle. But it took me $7,000 and 3 trips. And one of the reasons why we call it one library at a time is I used to come home, raise money for a library, do a library, come home, raise money for a library, go do a library. It was literally one library at a time.
And you were going, so, I mean,
I was
like,
going,
I know this first one, but you were going on all three, just, you would prepare it and then you would go.
and then
Okay.
I would go. And I learned a lot. And then I was able to start structuring it a little bit. I think the first time we went with 2 people was actually Paige and I went to Chicago to an after-school program. They had a ton of books there already, and we worked really hard, and Paige even did some artwork for the room. It ended up being just a beautiful space. But she was the perfect person to be a second,
Mm-hmm.
you know, me leading and her being a second. It was perfect because she already knew the concept.
Right.
Later on, we did the how-to booklets. And again, Paige helped block that all out. And that's changed a lot. And so has how we actually do a library. It's more structured, but at the same time, flexible enough to meet the needs of the community where we are, and not presuppose that every community is the same and has the same needs. I think that's one of our strengths, is that we're flexible. And the whole concept of being the second volunteer is twofold. One, it's not terribly safe for a woman to go out by herself, out in a foreign country, into the countryside or whatever. But 2, it's good, or more. And the other thing that developed is that, like when you and Sydney first did it, Sydney trained to be a lead, and she went and met you for your community's library, and she basically trained you. And then you were ready to lead team.
So whenever you and Paige did that first one in Chicago, so after that, it kind of came to you that like going by 2s and doing it together as what emerged was a leader, which we call a first, and then a second, which is the person supporting, and also the second may or may not have been on another trip. They don't have as much experience.
Right.
So
And there could be multiple seconds. You know, I may be taking a team of 5 people, but technically they're all seconds. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why that's important, is when you say you'd never been on a trip, if you came on a trip with me and I was the lead and you were the second, you would learn by doing. So as we do it, I'll make sure that you've been to every little station and you know every single step, from taking a book, cataloging it, labeling it, shelving it. And then you're trained and you can be a lead.
Right.
Some people want to be seconds, but they don't ever want to be a lead, which is fine too. And some people, I mean, you did what, 3 with, you did 1 with Sydney and 2 with me?
2 with you, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Before you actually took off. And Hani and
Leica. Mm-hmm.
And Leica, who we're going to talk to in the next couple of weeks, that are Panamanian, they wanted to do a couple of libraries before they went out on their own. So one of the things I really like, and I think we've been pretty successful with, is allowing this organization to grow and to change sort of organically.
Yeah.
Where it just makes sense. So
I think, you know, one thing that we had talked about was how the different ways it could go. So, you know, you could always be a second if you want to. If, you know, anyone's listening to this and you want to go on a trip with us, you don't have to ever be a leader if you don't want to. And then there's also those situations, Susan's, where you've trained people. We don't do this all the time, but I know that there's been some countries where you've trained people in your house. You've given them one-on-one, step-by-step directions because either we couldn't go to the country or something like that. So that's another option too.
Right. That's how I trained Sydney.
Okay.
Before she came to visit you, we came into my office and I had piles of books just kind of randomly in the floor, and a little table set up, and she and I just started doing it. And we covered nonfiction, fiction, resources, age groupings, all different kinds. But she had that booklet too, How to Build a Library, One Library at a Time, in English.
Mm-hmm.
And she also, with those books, we have them in English, Spanish, and French. And with those books, even if it's been, say, 6 months since you were a second,
mm-hmm.
you may not remember exactly. And that's what that book is from. And I'll admit, if it's been 6 months or more since I've done a library, I'm like, okay, let me flip through this and double check that I'm doing this right.
Or when you're training a bunch of people and they're like looking at the booklet and you're saying something that's like a little bit or a lot contrary to what, and they're like, oh, but the booklet says, and you're like, I see the booklet.
What? It does what? But that's where too, you have to, in some libraries, they want us to divide it between children and youth. In some libraries, they just kind of want everything together, except for maybe some adult books that are inappropriate for children.
And that's too where it might be helpful if somebody had been a second and had been on maybe even a few trips, because there's always things I think that are going to happen, where your experience, I think, that's one of the things that we say we bring is experience and how many libraries we've done. And as you're saying, our strength of flexibility. So when you've been on a couple, when you've been to a few different countries, you can ebb and flow maybe a little bit better. You're not, just held to the book. If, as you're always saying to us, like, whatever works for them is what's important. That's what we have to do because you want it to be sustainable. And I definitely, as I've done more, I feel like I have, not your wealth of knowledge, but I've got something in the bank, when I'm going to another library of also too, like, strategic options you could offer them if we can't quite figure out how to organize these resources or whatever. But you might just not have that yet build up if you haven't been on a lot.
Right. And sometimes I'll reach a point where I'll say, this is how you do it. And I can see on their faces that it isn't making sense to them. Mm. So then you can back up and you can say, how do you think this would work best for you?
Yeah.
And of course, at the end, I always say, the Dewey Decimal System is used throughout the world. This is a simplified version, but if it doesn't work for you, change it. And to my knowledge, I'm happy to say it's worked for everybody. So that makes me and Paige and you, all of us who are sort of leading one library at a time into the future as we go. A little more.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I think a good example of this is how, I don't want to get in the weeds here, but whenever we do our Dewey Decimal System, it's just interesting to note that we divide the nonfiction in hundreds, right? And I think it's been really smart of you to say, we're not going to go any farther than that. We're going to say, all science books are going in this 100 section, because it puts less pressure on them to try to keep up with, the larger the library grows. It's the nonfictions, as we've already said, that's what they lack the most. So often we're leaving with, at the end of our trip, we're leaving and there might be like 5 books in one, this section of history. There might be 15 or 20, but I just wanted to throw out that example because that came to mind when you were saying that I think that it was a good idea of you from the beginning to not get too in the weeds,
Well, actually, from the beginning, I was going out 3 decimal points. That was that first library in David that took me forever. And I got down there the second time and all the 500s were in one spot and 600s. And I thought, I am killing myself for nothing. So I changed it. But actually, the last library Paige and I did in Peru, we added a little bit more.
Okay.
Because the categories didn't really give you enough information to know where to put book A.
I'm popping in for just a second. I didn't turn the video on. But yeah, we didn't have a choice either, because it was another library with just a massive amount of books that were almost all in like 3 sections. And so it was like, well, we could put, 400 books in one section, and they just weren't, you'd never find anything.
Yeah.
So it was definitely one of the cases where we had to kind of change it to make it work for that specific library, or else they were just going to have a problem, finding their books once they did. But it was a special case, and now we know what to do if that case comes about, because it worked out really well.
Yeah,
and
that's
was that
where
the
flexibility. That's where the flexibility comes in, and knowing that you need to think about each community and meet their needs, rather than just saying, this is how we do it.
Yeah,
this is set in stone. And but that Peru trip was really good for stretching us.
And was that in the city, Susan? Was that one in the city, or?
Close. It's Arequipa, where you and Eddie would go. Yeah.
Right. A bigger town.
It was sort of in a residential area, on the outskirts of the second largest town in Peru.
Well, as we're doing more libraries in different places, I know that we're hoping to get some in Guatemala City. I mean, it could be, like you and Paige are saying, it could be that they need to be a little bit more detailed. A lot of the work we've done has been, very, very small ones, or medium-sized ones. But yeah, I think it's a good example of us, shape into what they need. But also, I wanted to ask, didn't you train somebody to do one in Africa? Because we haven't gone to. You've never been to Africa, right? Like, we haven't been with One Library at a Time.
One Library at a Time has been to Africa,
right.
Been to Ghana. But one of the members of the One Library at a Time board, Fletch Roberts, he has a good friend. He and the other guy, Georges, coached soccer for their boys from the time they were in kindergarten, and now they're in high school. But he's from the Ivory Coast. One Library at a Time could not go to the Ivory Coast. I can't send anybody to the Ivory Coast, because one of our hard and fast rules is, if the Peace Corps has pulled out, we don't go there.
Like, pulled out for safety reasons.
For safety reasons. And so the Ivory Coast has no Peace Corps volunteers for safety reasons. So, but Georges is from there, and every 1 to 2 years, he goes back to his village in the Ivory Coast, and he takes things to help support the village. And Fletch talked to him about One Library at a Time. And so Georges came over here, has been over here twice. He and Fletch and I did a pretend library here. And then he actually took the booklet home with him, because I hadn't used the French in several years. And so it needed to be translated again. And specifically translated into the French they use in the Ivory Coast.
Okay, like that dialect.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of French books, and Georges is going to take them now with COVID. I don't know whether it'll be this summer, but it may be next year. But he retranslated it, so it's the booklet's ready to go, and we've got plenty of books ready to go. And then I'll see about posting some.
Yeah, that's a great, it's good on various levels for us. I think, I know we love to go to new countries. I always want to go to the new countries, but it does. I mean, when we're going to Africa and Asia, flights are much more expensive than if we're going to Latin America. And it's great for us to still be able to contribute, even if it were an African country that we could go to. And, hopefully we do get to go to some, but it's a lot of our resources we could stem to do maybe a couple, but still, somewhere else that might be closer, but still getting people training and still having us represent and send resources, to send people, in the countries that we can't go to because of safety, or just in general too, because, that multiplies the work.
Right.
Multiplies our impact, I think. So I think that's a really creative way that you've come up with there.
Well, and I was really excited about this year in particular because we were actually going to be layering some trips.
Okay.
So, your trip was going to overlap Holly's trip, who was going to overlap. And we had 12 libraries on the books to do. We've done 4. We're going to have to change gears a little bit because of COVID, but we have some libraries here in the US that as soon as things clear up here, we can do. And, we'll see. Again, that's that flexibility.
Yeah.
So important. And it's not like we're going to let those other sites go. We'll have to pick them up next year.
When it's time, when it's safe. Another thing I wanted us to talk a little bit about how we've seen, because the standard, way that kind of became designed for the teams was like a first, and then you train as a second, and then you could be a first if you want to, right? But I think that we've seen some interesting ways that volunteers have multiplied themselves. People have become leads. And I think a prime example of that has been in Panama. And I don't know if Paige might want to jump in here, but yeah. I know that there's been a couple where she has gone to help some Peace Corps volunteers, and other Peace Corps volunteers have come to help their friend, their colleague with their library. And one specifically was Laura, who went to help a friend. And then she went back to her own community in her own initiative, and she installed our method into her school's library.
Yeah, that one was pretty incredible. She asked if she could take a copy of the how-to book. And I was like, absolutely, I'll email it to her. I ended up getting a digital copy and emailing it to her, and she did all of that. And then we sent Hani and Leica to do one with her, right?
Well, it gets even more creative because so when she had done hers, and then after she did her schools, she was really trying to get their provincial library reopened. It had been shut for a while, but with the different political changes, which is something that is sometimes a continual struggle in a country like Panama. Every 5 years it changes, and it could wipe out everyone who's in office, even some of the provincial offices, and projects that were alive can become dead. So I think there was a little bit of that happening, and maybe that's why it was closed, but she got them to reopen it. And Hani and Leica, they weren't able to make the time pretty fast, because I think maybe her service was ending, and they weren't able to turn around the trip, but we were able to send them funds, and they went book shopping with her. And so we flew them up to David, which is a city in Panama, and they met there, and they were able to book buy with her and resources or whatever. And then she took it back to because that provincial library was reopening, because she was already trained as a first, so she was fine to do it on her own. But I couldn't get over her initiative. I'm just like, which because you talk to all different people who want a library. You guys know, you talk to different people that want a library, and mainly we're trying to vet to see if your community's ready and all that kind of stuff. And like, she's sending me pictures of a completed library she's done solo. She might have had friends, but on her own initiative.
Yeah, and we need to put that. I just was sitting here going, our list of finished libraries. We just have Laura's site. We forgot to put in the provincial library.
She actually did too. Yeah.
Yeah, she did too. And it always makes me feel good, of course, but it's also a testament to our leads, people like Paige, who can sit there, and I've got a picture somewhere of all the people that worked on the library. And there were several Peace Corps volunteers from other communities that came in to help. And that spurred on, other libraries grew out of that one.
Yeah.
So that's where the first and the seconds come into play. And it's just exciting. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like, I need to go on every trip, because if I don't go, then it won't, blah, 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 blah. Exactly the opposite. When you lead a trip, or when Paige leads a trip, or whomever, I like it when you come home and you tell me what happened, because that can help us figure out how to move forward, especially if we're new in a country.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting to see just multiplication, strategies or factors that we wouldn't have even,
planned.
Plan. Because I know that there's also, Susan, I think another kind of way that we go as a team or volunteers is sometimes with groups. Sometimes people just want to go in groups from the US. And maybe you've led some of those, or you can train people to be leads on those. I will say that it's good if whoever you're going with, like that organization has a touch in the country, they know the language. I mean, it's, I think being a lead, in that advantage, being a lead is, knowing the language, knowing something of the culture, having contacts and touch points there. It's a little bit easier to maneuver. But anyway, I was just trying to make up the point about groups and how.
Yeah, and there's a group I went with from Louisiana, and my daughter Catherine was actually with me on that one. And we did this library, and it was just funny because the guy who was over the whole project that was going on, and in this group, some people were doing building and some people were playing with kids, and there was just a lot going on. And there was Catherine and I, and we were doing a library, and David said, "Oh, we're not going to have the space ready." And I just looked at him and I said, "Yes, you will." I thought, I can't believe I just looked at this man I just met and laid down the law. And he was kind of stunned, I think. And it was ready. When it was time to put the books on the shelf, it was ready. He had a guy in there that worked really hard to get all the concrete in and the bookshelves and everything ready to go.
So they were building while you guys were there?
Oh, yeah. They were building the library. Yeah. It was one of those things where you got to be flexible, but you also got to kind of lay down the law a little bit too.
Yeah.
But from that group, Beth Gosman and Vicki Sidbottom really liked what One Library at a Time does. And we've been on, counting that one, 4 trips together.
So it's just like two friends that like to go on trips together, and they've just re-volunteered with us again and again, and you go with them.
Yeah, I was supposed to go the end of May, but one of interesting things is Beth was getting ready to go on the first trip with just one library at a time. And this friend of hers calls her and from another city. And Beth said, you know, her friend said, "What you up to?" And Beth said, "Well, I'm really excited. I'm getting ready to go to," where did we go first? I think Cuba. Getting ready to go to Cuba with this organization called One Library at a Time. And her friend said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm going with this organization, One Library at a Time." And her friend says, "Where is One Library at a Time based?" And Beth said, "Well, in Charlotte." She says, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I saw that on the web, and in my book club yesterday, all we did was talk about One Library at a Time. We didn't even talk about our book." And it was like, wow, this is kind of cool. And now she supports One Library at a Time, along with Beth, and hopefully maybe she can go on a trip with us. But I've made a lot of good friends. And it's almost like getting together with your sister or brother or cousin. When you travel with people, it's like, yay, we're getting ready to go play together.
Yeah. And when you get to go on multiple trips, because I think is it Susan Wilson is also a regular volunteer with us?
Oh yeah, she goes. She was I said Paige was my first volunteer, but Susan was staying at the same hostel where I stayed when I was doing the library in David, that first library.
Alone.
And yeah, and she laughs because she said, I looked over and there was a woman with long gray hair that was in a braid, and she's drinking a glass of wine and writing all this stuff with books, and she's got a typewriter out. I had all this stuff going on. And since then, we've become like sisters, and we've traveled a lot together, and we also visit each other. You know, I'll go up to Cape Cod and see her, or she'll come to Charlotte and see me. And so yeah,
you never know what kind of relationships are going to come out of the trips we do and the volunteer connections that we make. And
it's good work. It's just, even when things go a little sideways, you've got good people around you, and you just figure out how to get back on track.
And I know that we've been talking about trips a lot, but I did want to say that, I mean, I think that if people are, in the Charlotte area, but they're not necessarily ready to go on a trip, but they just want to learn about us, we're open to that. I think you're always open to people to help pack for trips, because there's several trips that, and packing for the trip takes, a couple of hours. It takes, well, more than that, because I know you do all the looking and choosing of the books and stuff like that. So I think we're definitely always open to volunteers like that too.
Yeah. Oh, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, this is where we plug in One Library at a Time at Gmail. And oh yeah, I love talking about One Library at a Time, obviously. And I've spoken at retirement centers, I've spoken at book clubs. And so if anybody needs a speaker or something like that, I would love the opportunity to tell some of the stories.
Yeah.
Some of the stories.
Well, I think that next week, we've mentioned Honey and Lake a couple of times, but I'm excited. We're all excited because they are some of our on the ground in country nationals that have started working with One Library at a Time, and we're going to have them on and from Panama. And get to talk with them a little bit about their story with us and some of the stuff they've been doing, especially recently, because they've been doing some trips, you know, completely on their own. So I'll be excited for us to talk with them next week.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Panama too is they're able to get supplies and buy some books. Panama City is a cosmopolitan city. We still, you know, and this will probably come up, but there are other countries where people we've trained as librarians are ready to be leads, but they still need us to bring the supplies and a bunch of books.
Right.
And I think with Hani, you left enough for what, 2 or 3 libraries when you saw?
Yeah, last time I went, I took enough for 2. And then they book shop and bought the rest in country. Yeah.
Right. So that's an exciting twist, but it just happened organically because of your work and your relationship with them. But
yeah,
it's another way for us to grow
right.
the group of people who have the ability to go places, and it also saves us a boatload of money that we can then turn around and do other libraries or increase the number of books we're sending. And still we try to keep that benchmark of $3,000 average per library. Some cost 2, some cost 4. Just basically it's airfare.
Yeah, that's a whole income, like actual citizens of the country we're working is an expansion of, like, as for ongoing volunteers, is an expansion that we are coming into now and really just enjoying seeing it multiply itself. So it'll be fun to have them on and get them to tell some stories next week.
Yeah, and we're probably getting to the boredom level. I don't want to bore you guys. Rachel and I both could talk for hours. But thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.
All right. Bye.